what I'd like to do first is look at 452. This is a bill which we're dealing with, and we have to get out of committee this next week. And it deals with the entire building aid grant application process. And there are several components within it I'd just like to walk through really quickly with you that we are looking at significant things which give the rationale for why we are doing this bill today. I think everybody understands that probably the most important thing we have to do is the timeline for grants. Is the current process is a timeline that's just so pinched. And by the way, for everybody here, Representative Hill is chairman of the School Building Authority, which has a component or responsibility tied directly with this building application process that we have established right now. So I'd like to walk through that and highlight some of the primary things which we have. You also have a sheet. Did you all get this sheet right here? This is a sheet that has comments on the side. That's the bill, but we also have an amendment to the bill. But I want to look at this one right here. It has some of the amending language within, but just hitting on some of the key components that we may want to be discussing. On the first page of that one, it has HB 452 as introduced, and the word introduced has been scratched out and amended 3/2/23. On the bottom of that page, on lines 28 going on down, there's an area which has been a possible issue of contention that we pay when a school receives this money. They get 80% up front and 20% upon completion of the project. And that decision's made by Amy. When they complete that project, then that's when they will receive that other 20%. There are those out there saying that perhaps we ought not be funding 80% up front. Maybe we should be sprinkling that over the period lifetime of the bond, enabling more school districts to receive building aid on the front side. Yeah, and it's been proposed too by a number of folks when we've had the hearings here. That's coming from a lot of directions. The reason why this 80% upfront was put there are several reasons. One of which, it results in the local school district not having to pay the interest on that bond for that period of time. They're going to get 80% upfront. Is that correct, Amy?
Is this recording?
Probably, because it was in the calendar. So
Then I will push the button. Yeah, that's correct, Representative Ladd.
thank you. Okay, so I wanted to highlight that one right there. And there is a comment there which reference it. As you go down through on page 2, you can see that there's some comments on same eligibility criteria conditions for the charter school as LEA. We have on line 3 at the top there on page 2, the amount of the grant to any charter public school established in accordance with the RSAB, blah, 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 shall be 30% of the eligible cost of construction. There's been some issues associated with this, Amy, in terms we have it here, but we don't have it elsewhere in statute. Is that correct?
That's correct. Charter schools are essentially prohibited in a charter school law from applying.
Yeah. So
We've not ever had application.
Correct. Correct.
yeah,
Is this tax?
this is going
Right, so-
to this goes through this committee next week. So that's why we're doing this now.
So building aid allows charter schools. It has a rate. Let me just say, building aid has a 30% flat rate for charter schools. However, somewhere else in the law, in the charter school law, says that they can't apply for building aid, which doesn't. That's not verbatim, but essentially prohibits them from seeking building aid. Yep.
Okay, on line 5 on that same page, funds received from charitable trusts, bequests, gifts, insurance policies, federal grants, or grants from other state programs shall be subtracted from the total project costs when computing grants under this paragraph. That's been in law a long time, but that's also a contentious issue. Yes.
If I may, that was the one area I looking to address. If there's an opportunity for me to speak to that from my own personal experience, I would like to do that at your, at your discretion before you leave the topic.
Well, we're going to be leaving that topic real shortly here. So why don't you, you drove down from Colebrook or Pittsburgh, so let's give you the opportunity.
You are very kind. Thank
Can
you.
you come back tomorrow?
I'm not busy tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, I know I don't mind making the trip truly, but thank you very much. May I begin?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So as I think you all know, my name is Deborah Taylor, and I'm the superintendent of schools for SAU 7, which includes Clarksville, Colebrook, Columbia, Pittsburgh, and Stewartstown school districts. And I've served for 15 years as a superintendent, 3 in my current position. So I'm here today to implore you to make very necessary changes to proposed HB 452, changes that with a stroke of your pen will change the lives of the students in the Colebrook School District and our surrounding communities. Let me briefly tell our story. Last fall, the Colebrook School District was notified we were ranked number 2 for eligibility for building aid. We presented a $16.5 million project and were approved for 60% of the state building aid, up to $9.9 million estimated, and dependent upon legislative appropriations. Our school board and district building committee, in conjunction with our architectural firm, created a modest design, including high school classrooms and labs, which integrated our newly approved North Point CTE Center on the same campus as the elementary school. Our committee and parent support group initiated a community information campaign. Colebrook's a small town, and our net assessed valuation is just over $193 million. The school includes one pre-K-12 school with 320 students housed in an elementary school, as well as tuition students from 6 towns in the surrounding area. Our high school students transitioned to the elementary school when the academy closed in 2019 because it was unsafe and provided many difficulties that were much too costly to repair. The original building was built in 1911. We also had a tech building behind that building, which we're currently leasing because the old school has been sold, and that lease is up in 3 years. So our project includes building an addition, as I mentioned, of 28,300 square feet and a renovation of 7,700 square feet, including conversion of existing, well, at this point we were looking at existing administrative spaces, but we've recently subsequently had changed that to include a separate building, which about for the same cost, which would be more efficient, including a health science lab, computer technology center, automotive technology bays, and a new high school gym. The site development costs were also included, including utility work, parking area, and landscaping, as well as contingency funds. So now I'm going to do a quote for you. I hope you don't mind. I enjoy poetry and literature, and this one really seemed to fit for me today. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. It's very famous, from Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, and expresses our circumstances well. So with that background, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, and we had nothing before us. And now I'll explain why we are in that position this time.
Yeah, just hold on. Or Jen could even, yeah, okay. Yeah, it'd be the other door, to the office.
No, that's all right. So at this time, with inflation higher than in nearly a generation, we had to ask our community to fund 40% of our project. This particular line 5 on page 2 of your bill that you've been reviewing today specifies that donations and grants cannot be used separate and apart from the total cost of the project to reduce the local taxpayer contribution. Earlier this week, on Tuesday, we had 700 people from our community. We have 1,000 voters, 700 came to our annual school meeting. We had divided them into two large spaces that were available to us, our gym and our cafeteria. Unfortunately, our vote was not successful for this project. However, our budget and our teacher collective bargaining agreement did pass. The difficulty is that 40% of our project is $6.5 million. And with a 15-year bond at 5.25%, we are speaking of, on average, $4 per thousand for our depressed community in Colebrook. And I mean that only in the way it's described elsewhere. I would never use that term to describe our community anywhere else, but in a place where it relates to the economics of our situation. So, despite these challenges, we have had more and more people come forward and offer assistance. So in addition to the $60% allocation from the department, on February 7th, we were offered a $2 million donation from a graduate of Colebrook Academy he's been identified in our newspaper. I'd rather not put him into the record, but he agreed to provide us with a $2 million donation if it could be separate and apart from the way your legislation reads, which is essentially it would have to be utilized to reduce the overall project, then building aid is applied. That's how the law reads right now. Because he would wanted to have the full 2 million applicable to reducing taxpayers' costs, not just a portion of it. Following that, we received notification that a local contractor was willing to build this project for us at a savings of $1.5 million. Then a few weeks later, we were told that the original donor was coming back and offering another $800,000. Now we were down to about 3.1 million of, again, outside of your formula, 3.1 million of funds that had not been collected. Still and all, our community did not feel that they could take that on. Unlike our CTE building projects, where 75% aid is provided and 25% match can come from any source, 19815E, which is also in your bill now, prohibits aid recipients from contributing to the local match. The language that's also contained in your proposed bill, which states that funds received from charitable trusts, bequests, gifts, insurance policies, federal grants, or grants from other state programs shall be subtracted from the total project costs when computing grants under this paragraph. Our community is proud, hardworking, and devoted to our children. However, they have reached their economic limit. Their total tax burden, including the town, the school, and the county, is over $30 per thousand this year. It's really too much for them to take on more taxable burden. However, Colebrook School District, located as we are in a isolated part of the state, we really are the center of education for New Hampshire schools. We have a 500 square mile school district, not to mention the many towns that are surrounding us that are outside of our district that also pay tuition to send children to Colebrook schools. Without this appropriation, in 3 years, our tech building, which we're now leasing to house our automotive program, will have to be closed. That means we will have no place for our auto program and our woodworking program to be available. We have used a borrowed space from a neighboring town in another school district in a family consumer science building to offer our culinary and hospitality CTE program because we don't have space in our building. I'm confident that if that particular portion of the law could be changed or removed, that funds received from the charitable trust, bequests, gifts, insurance policies, grants, or grants from other state programs can be struck so that we can align them to can remove them from that computation and reduce our local taxpayer obligation, that we would be able to receive sufficient money from donations and grants to pay the entire remaining amount of $3 million. Because of the way the law is written right now, we can't. Do we have another chance of passing this next year? Yes. I'm not certain that our economy is going to improve to the extent that we'll be able to, that our taxpayers are going to be able to find funds available in their own personal finances to support it, while they do support the schools, as I mentioned, in many ways. So my suggestions to you are this, and then I'll be quiet. Thank you for listening to me for so long, and this, even though we're not formally in a hearing. First, that you just strike that entire section of the bill, which relates to the funds, charitable trusts, and gifts and grants. Or if that's a bridge too far, in your opinion, consider adding a provision that waives the requirement for school districts eligible for 60% building aid, which are those districts like ours that are low income, that have a high percentage of free and reduced lunch, where our taxpayers are already extremely burdened due to property taxes as the primary way that we fund our schools. Lastly, and this is probably the least likely, but another option you might have, and I've seen this in other legislation, if you don't support the other two options, I request that a specific statement be included that would exempt Colebrook School District from this particular provision so that we can get on with building our school and making a better future for the students in Colebrook, SAU 7, and all the surrounding communities in the North Country. Thank you very much. I included in your material, you had that testimony along with these green
Yeah,
handouts.
we
that
have copies, those up here.
describe the CTE Center so that you can see all of what's included and how very exciting it is. We're devastated with the loss of our vote. I'm just not convinced that our community can afford the remaining funds, the $6 million that are required in order to make this project happen. And it's not I always look at it this way. I'm coming in, I'm going to choke up, sorry. This is my 40th year of education. And like I'm sure many of you, I came from a humble beginning, and it's not our kids' fault that they were born in a community that is poor. It's up to us to help them to develop into people that are going to be positive and contributing members of society and have the skills that they need to ensure that they will have a positive life and can contribute to their community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, did you have any? Yeah.
I do. I have a couple of thoughts. Not sure if it's appropriate or not.
You can.
So part of my responsibility is that in the school building authority, I was put in place because of my finance background, which I'm unable to use actually in my current position on the school building authority. We actually have two finance people. We have on the board, we have the state treasurer, and we have myself. But neither of us, and we struggle with this, speaking for myself anyway, with what I deem to be my fiduciary responsibility. My goal as a finance person is to always look for the client's needs first, not for my needs. As such, when I'm on the school building authority, I try to look for the state's interest. We're spending state taxpayers' money is the way I look at it. And I'm not able to, with the current setup, with the way our scoring system and everything, it doesn't lend itself well to individual stories. It works great for the process as a whole, but individual parts of it, I think, are failing. So I'm receptive to ideas that you have. In fact, I welcome creative ideas like carving out 60% towns or districts. I also look at carving out, just for sake of argument, Colebrook, if you look at the points awarded under unsafe conditions for fire safety and for structural and blah, 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 that speaks to me as well, you know.
Well, if we look at that alone, the issue you just brought up, we also know, and correct me if I'm incorrect, Amy, that there's an emergency process that if a school is in a situation where there is such an emergency, where you have issues of a roof ready to fall in, or if you have some of that basic building code that we drafted into this legislation years ago, where it's dependent upon the fire marshal's recommendations, that that would take precedent over some of the other projects that are in line. Is that correct?
That's correct in the sense that somebody that comes, we haven't been in this process long enough to develop a backlog list of projects. But if a project was to apply the following year, they can jump that line. Otherwise, they just get in line
Let's look at
in a right
page
way.
4 right now then, on this paper, and look at lines 15 going forward.
Before we get there, just let me put on the record, before we get off the unsafe conditions
Yeah.
part of this, to me, it's no coincidence that the schools that are ranked 1, 2, and 3 all score the highest number of points for unsafe conditions.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, telling me that it somehow works to value those pieces, but there is no weighting other than the fact that of the number of points that are gathered in this whole
So on
thing.
page 4, it has a portion there which has been added into 452, which deals with the school building authority. And on the bottom of course, if you look at line 15, 16, that's the emergency projects that the commissioner can deal with. But if you look down at line 28, 29, 30, going on to the other page, and we're talking about the school building authority here, what you shall or you shall not do. The school building authority shall verify the ranking submitted by the commissioner, which comes to you. And to this point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, that you've been doing it based upon the criteria that that they've been approved by DOE. But this would also say, in accordance with the criteria defined in subparagraph 2B, that's your responsibility as the school building authority elsewhere in statute. Determine if the school district or charter public school has the financial means and available resources for school building project, and make a written report of findings and submit a list in descending rank order to the State Board of Education for approval. If you saw something that you felt was being paid by other available resources, or they had the financial capability, or they didn't have it, you could re-rank, make a recommendation to re-rank those, and then it would come back to the department for their work over. Is that correct? I don't know if you've had to do that in the past.
I've not had to. This new language hasn't given us the ability to do anything like that. This language, as I read it, would give us the ability to re-rank based on that. All we've had the ability to now is, and I say this kind of half tongue in cheek, all I've been doing now is checking Amy's math to make sure she's added up the points correctly, which is unsatisfactory to me.
Well, you made a visit to Haverhill and looked at the
I
old
did.
building, so
I
you
did.
did a lot more there in checking. And
I did, but getting to the timeline here, I'm not afforded that luxury on 17 projects, and we can't get our volunteer team basically, or part-time team, or however you want to call a bunch of volunteers, to be able to take the time to go to all 17
You're dealing
projects.
with the state fire marshal, the treasurer of
Right.
the state, the commissioner of education.
Right.
Yeah.
We have things, we have other things to do. Now, as I look at
Happy to
this,
show you through a virtual meeting.
that may be a process as well. I mean, that, I will say, even from the Haverhill meeting, if we had done, just to pick your school out, even if we had done a virtual meeting, it's not the same as walking the grounds. Yeah. I really feel like we are rearranging the decks on the Titanic here. I don't think we have the capability of changing a few things and giving people different authority. I think we need a fundamental rethink of, and you mentioned some of those in the beginning.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
We were just going through, now, the point being right now is that anything we change on this bill, you're not going to see any changes occur until, and if the governor signs it, and if then it's signed by September or August.
Not to mention the funding, right?
And yeah, and we're dealing with that funding right now.
What's the,
Would the funding then drop down to Concord, which is the next one down?
So just so that we don't get sidetracked, I think if we just stick with, if I just stick with what Superintendent, I was gonna call you representative, so Superintendent Taylor was saying, like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that what we're talking about right now is on page 2, the funds received from charitable trusts. It is just simply saying whether we want that allowed to be used as the local match. So 60%, 40%, the community has to come up with 40%. Do you want that to be able to allow schools to use other resources as their local match? And the bill would be effective as it's amended, July
1st.
2023. So that would apply to all the applicants that I have right now. It's the new ranking or a new system that wouldn't apply to 2025.
I don't know what the purpose of this original language was.
I don't know where it came
why.
from either. I think
No,
it's been in for a while.
It was an attempt to see your organization a little bit more than just a rubber stamp.
No. I don't mean that.
Okay.
The added language. I'm saying the funds
Oh, I
received
don't-
from charitable
That's been there
trusts.
since the.
Well, I
been there
understand.
forever.
Well, maybe since you were around, I don't know. But
That might be true, but I do wonder what is the difference if it's paid by a donor or the taxpayers who are.
I agree.
Burdened. It's not, we're asking for any more money,
I agree.
asking for another nickel.
I suspect it has to do with ownership. And you know, when you've put nothing into it, well, two things. One is the cost can be even higher. You're not necessarily as frugal. And two, you don't have the care and et cetera when you have no ownership. And that may have been an attempt to make sure that the community was committed.
But what difference would it make, to use Amy's phraseology, whether this money that pays their share comes from any of these sources or comes from the community? I don't see the point.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, I suspect that's where the
Okay.
original language came from, was that concern.
I think
suspected
originally
the
when we
same,
did this,
too.
it was back when Duke Albany and I wrote this thing. And that's many years ago, at least, well,
So,
more than a decade.
so let me ask you, I have not in my time on the board or on the authority, no, I have not seen, and maybe Amy would recall, if there was ever a similar case, that any of these became an issue.
We've only
Quite
approved
frankly,
6 or
I've
7
glazed-
projects since that time.
That's true, but this language has been
glazed
in
right
here
over it.
even from old building
Yeah,
aid.
yeah.
Right.
And it is part of our calculation process. Almost everybody receives some kind of donation or federal, mostly from energy rebates. So on our end, we don't pay building aid on anything. And energy rebates is almost something all of our applications come through with. So we subtract that off from the top, and then we end up applying the rate because of this law. So all as that would say is that now energy rebates, federal grants, ESSER funds, any of that money can be used as a portion of their local match in order to apply for building aid. Whether you all want to do that is a different discussion, but that's I think what the question is.
Right, so listing all of those items, this is my personal opinion, I wouldn't be thrilled about ESSER funds going into this. I wouldn't be thrilled actually about energy rebates going into this. I would have no problem, however, if in your situation, having a local donor, or an insurance policy, a bequest, a gift, any of that doesn't make any
That's
damn
how the
difference to
University
me
of
at
Maine
all.
built their hockey rink. Alphonse.
I understand.
provided all the
This is what I'm saying. So
So,
I've
You're
never
thinking about
had a
language,
reason
right.
to examine this,
Yes.
but given your testimony, I have no reason to think that that shouldn't be stricken from here.
those lines, yeah.
Or at least
Well, some of it, some of
at least the
I do agree with you as far as ESSER grants and other rebates and things
Yeah.
like that. We do have some potential of a Northern Borders Commission grant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. Those are actually federal flow-through funds specifically for depressed parts of your state. Southwest and Northwest are the two areas that qualify. And they have infrastructure grants, which is another, again, it's unlike ESSER for it's not COVID related at all. It's specifically to rebuilding infrastructure in communities, municipal or schools. And we've been in communication with them, and I believe that that grant would qualify, but I also understand what you're saying about the others.
By doing what you're doing here, is there savings that you're not going to have to send as many kids over to Canaan for CTE? You would keep them in your own
Right.
building?
We now have to
So-
spend $125,000 a year for tuition for those students to go to Canaan for their CTE center. And they don't send anyone back to us because of, I guess that they've told us it's because their state doesn't allow them to do so. But don't understand that myself. I've even.
That's the way it's working all over the border at the 5 CTE centers in Vermont. We go there, they don't.
They don't come here. Yeah.
So-
Well, either way, it's, to us, it's not, we're not looking for any more funds from the state whatsoever. It's just, we'd like a little flexibility in, like I said, we've already have nearly $3 million in donations, and people have been approaching me and saying they'd like to contribute. I'm certain that within 6 months, we could completely cover that local cost. But it doesn't help us if we have to ratchet down the overall cost. Because,
Right.
as you know, I'd have to raise 16 million in order for there
So-
to be no impact on the taxpayers. under
So
this
I think what we can do here, is because we have a lot on the docket here today,
Yeah.
but this component right here, we can address through the amending language which we're proposing, if we can come up with something that might work. I kind of agree that some of it may not be needed in this law. So we can look at that and we act on this next week. There's still time to, that's why we're doing what we're doing here right now.
Right.
Understand though that it's quite possible another 2 years or from now, this may be all passé. And we're going through what we see as a transitional step to maybe a transitional step, determining upon where the pool of money is going to come from and who's going to have the responsibility. Is it going to be the local or is it going to be the state, or to what degree? How do we account for the differences in communities? Like your community has a huge difference compared to Waterville Valley.
Right.
One last thing. I think again, financial guy. Money is fungible, so I often wonder whether there's not an opportunity for creativity in other than targeting the donation to this project. If there's not a possibility of donating to someplace else where money, that donation can go, and that frees up money that can be used outside of this language. Yeah, you know,
We've actually explored a lot of those
Okay.
avenues, and what the challenge is that the way this language is written, you can't utilize trusts or any other ways of paying for this without taking it off the top. And in order to do sort of a pay down kind of arrangement, that's a poor way of describing it. We would have to borrow the money first so that we would have and use
Yeah,
those funds
yeah.
to pay it back.
I
And
understand
that's
where
the
Ripson
problem.
Hill's coming from though, because I used to do that with my school budget.
Right.
District that if we can offset somewhere else in our operating budget, but money's coming in from somewhere else, then we can use those monies possibly because money's not targeted
right.
and you utilize it over here.
Well, our annual operating budget is 7.8 million, so we don't have enough play in a budget that small to make this kind of
Okay.
an option. But you are right, and we've looked at all of those things, but number one, to do that, we have to have the bond has to be approved. Then we
Right.
can pay it down, but without the bond, we wouldn't be able to do that.
The other thing that I still think needs to be examined, and this, I promise you, will take us off track, but I won't be far off. CTE, to me, needs to be looked at by districts from a standpoint of whether utilizing the existing RSAs and having school districts authorize a charter school, similar to Spark Academy in Manchester, authorize a charter school, use the startup charter school money for CTE, and utilize the 100% funding for charter schools, and segregate your CTE from the district, I guess.
In a previous district outside of New Hampshire, I did something similar, where it was a small alternative high school program. And in that state, you were able to integrate your charter into your public school. It's not the same here in New Hampshire, but the difficulty is we don't have space. And right now, the charter school legislation doesn't allow building aid to be considered. It's 100% to pay for your operating expenses, but not to build. So we wouldn't be able to do that here in this particular case, although I don't think our community would be opposed to that option if we had a place to locate the programs.
So maybe, so maybe that donation money can utilize or locate a suitable building. You know, this is all part of the moving the pieces around until it fits, you know.
Well, if you
Just a thought.
I'd love to have you visit. We had to close our high school because of, as I mentioned before, unsafe, very old, a lot of issues that would have cost probably 30 million to repair. It wasn't a worthwhile investment for us. There are no other buildings in the town that are available.
Has Commissioner Edelblut visited?
He has visited, not recently, I think probably about maybe a year and a half ago.
He has an interesting story on a donor that in Manchester, I think it was, that was willing to build a school and virtually lease it back to the community, and the school would, and the district would own the school at the end of 30 years or something like that. And Manchester turned it down, which seemed the silliest choice I've ever heard, ever.
They didn't
But-
ask us about that.
But it may be something that you would like to have a conversation with him about and
Yes,
see if there was someone else that, with the available money that in the North Country that you already somewhat mentioned, or the opportunities for credits, I can't believe something like that wouldn't be offered.
Would it be as I said in the beginning, a stroke of your pen, eliminate this entire section or revise it to allow for the use of charitable trusts or donations,
I wouldn't be opposed.
that would solve our problem immediately. And we, like I said, we only have 3 years. As you know, it takes a year to prepare to break ground.
I
We're
do.
not breaking ground until next summer. So,
Can data be developed to illustrate any pattern of affect there may be with potential donors who have pulled out of something because of or whatever? It seems to me that it's absolutely wrong-headed to penalize the person needing the help because somebody else is willing to help them too. And to insist that, we're gonna take it away and give it to somebody across the street. That isn't the way donors work, in my experience.
What was the vote you had, you didn't get the votes you needed. Is that a result that folks feel that the CTE Center Canaan is still providing the adequate needs for their kids?
no, because our CTE center is very different, is, none of the programs are duplicated. And when we received approval from the Department of Ed last year to initiate our CTE program, we had 300 to 400 people in our cafeteria to speak to Commissioner Edelblut and explain how strongly they supported the CTE concept. So I can say unequivocally that there is huge support for the CTE. The problem we are having is inflation, high costs for food, for fuel, and of course our income is already depressed amongst the
Are you receiving any
folks.
Carl Perkins money?
Well, because we just opened this year, no, but next year we will. And the Carl Perkins amount that they had been giving to Canaan will come to us. I don't know what the final allocation is, but it's in the realm of around $30,000 to $40,000 per year.
So then it sounds like if it's not gonna go to Canaan, you're not gonna be sending any more kids to Canaan.
Well, that's a complicated discussion because supposedly they're an approved New Hampshire Region 1 center. And we are obliged by law to allow students to attend any center they choose to attend, if they're
Yeah.
approved. So even though they don't send, as you mentioned, students to ours. And as I said, their programs, we have only about 8 or so students going there now. The numbers have really declined because the programs they've had just aren't of interest to our students. We have automotive technology, which includes power sports, and that's our area, right? It's all about repairing power sports equipment and diesel mechanics in that one program. We have a teacher education program because we have a very difficult time bringing new teachers into our region, and we have a lot of our own students who are interested in beginning that career, and that's in partnership with White Mountain and Plymouth. We also have a health sciences program, which our hospital is a very strong partner with, and that enables our students to get experience not just as LNAs, but all kinds of career fields. Right now, we have 5 students graduating. 3 want to become physicians. One wants.
Your hospital is a offshoot of Hitchcock, right?
No, it's an offshoot of the Berlin. It's
Well, it's not part of Dartmouth Hitchcock?
no. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Upper Connecticut Valley Hospital, UCVH. It's not part of Hitchcock. No.
Okay.
If we were to strike charitable trust, bequests, gifts, and insurance policies from that line, that would solve your issue. I have no problem.
Okay.
Lock that off and road straight.
Those 4?
Those 4.
Okay, good. So let's roll on here. We can't guarantee anything, but you made your case.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the trip back to Pittsburgh.
Yes. Well, I'll be stopping at the office first.
Okay, thank you. Going through this, you can see the comments I have in various places, but the primary reason for this, because I want to get on some other things to discuss today, is that we need to clear up a few areas within it that we had there prior. I also have to find out what you think about the section on the school building authority. But the timeline is imperative that we get something in place for timeline. Can you explain what the timeline does for us now, Amy?
Meaning that what this would happen if this were to
Well,
pass?
for future applications, even
Right.
if it's just for the next 2 years, how's that going to help both groups here?
Right, so essentially, again, if building aid changes in the future, that is probably a separate conversation. But for this, what this does mostly for me and the school districts is it allows them to not apply a year in advance. It actually requires them or allows them to apply many months later. And so they're essentially applying, if it were this year, they would be applying right now. That's a good way to look at it, is they would be applying right now. Then the state budget would come out in the next couple of months. And then they would get ranked this fall. And then they could know where they stand on the list. But most importantly, they would know how much commitment they can have from the state. Maybe it's none, maybe it's some. Then they're able to go to their voters with an amount. Right now, they're not. Colebrook, and all the others on the list just went to their voters without having any idea of money that's going to be appropriated or not. So pushing that timeline out, further out, allows them to apply right now, get that determination by this fall, go to their voters in the spring. And most importantly, if their voters say yes, then they can start construction when they need to in the spring. This current timeline we have right now misses out on so many things, but it misses out on getting the voters to know what they're voting for. But it also misses out on the construction season, because July 1st, they find out how much money, if they're going to get any, then they can't start construction this summer. They have to wait all the way, and all of those costs get messed up. So this amendment, for timeline wise, addresses that, which I think is the main problem. There might be other issues, but I think that is the
So the
most
state board
significant one.
approves by November 15th.
Right, and if you put it in terms of this year, because it's easier for
Yeah.
all of us to understand, because we're right now talking about the state budget, it would mean that November 1st of this year, they would have a commitment from the state on how much they would be awarded for building aid
So then it goes before the voters
in next
in
March.
in the following March.
And then they can start construction in June.
So
Once their kids get out of school, for some of them anyway, that would be a benefit to them. And then it also repeats that every year. I think we've talked about this before. Well, building aid is just unstable in the sense of knowing how much money is going to come. And I worry that schools are making a decision on a project that maybe they haven't vetted fully through their community, or, because it's this one chance that they get versus having to reapply the following year. Because then if they get voted down, well, then they can just listen to their voters and figure out what project can really pass and apply next year, rather than waiting 2 years to apply and then apply a year in advance the way it is right now. It's a long timeline, our current timeline, and it causes a lot of uncertainty.
So for me, the big problem, there's a number of big problems. That timeline is horrendous.
the current one or the proposed one?
I'm not qualified to talk on the proposed one as yet. But beyond the timeline, some of the problems that I see is timing is everything in this. Part of it is who else is applying in the same year that you are. Some of this is, the luck of the draw here of, you may be in I forget how many were in the process.
17.
The year before.
5.
Yeah, so you see what I'm saying? If you're, one of 17 versus one of 5, and you're submitting the same amount of money into building aid, you got to like your chances when you're one of five, more so than when you're one of 17. But also struck in here is this idea of, some schools applying for, 170 million and some schools applying for 13 million. If you're looking at how many lives you change, you can do a lot of those $13 million projects for the kind of like the discussion we've had with public school infrastructure. Is it fair that we don't do $13 million projects for schools like Holbrook when one project in Concord sucks up 170 million? It's part of the conversation that we have to have where money is, that we have a cap
That's
of
what we
money.
got on- the next ticket here on that, on the docket today is to look at that particular concept. And the other thing I wanted to look at is that, so let's say we approved this year the Colebrook and Monadnock, is it that?
Yep, that's number
And
3.
we also hit the Rochester.
Correct.
What about the ones just down below? Do they automatically go to the top of the list, or are they still on the list and have to compete with other schools which may come on the list over the course of the next year?
Concord is next.
Yes, it is next.
That's an entity all in.
So, 2 things. One, you have to remember, it's so important to remember this when you're talking about projects like Concord and others. What you see in front of you is their request, not what they're eligible for. All schools are eligible for cost per square foot per pupil. So, I think there's a lot of validity in saying a big school might be a rebuild of a big school, might be getting an opportunity, like how can we fund that smaller renovation project? Those are, in my opinion, valid conversations because they're hard to get to. Those like smaller projects at the bottom of the list, because they don't rank as high. I think that is a problem. How does somebody that just wants to put a secure vestibule on their building, how do they compete with a brand new rebuild? Because they're in the same competing. But when you just talk about all full rebuilds or full new schools, then you're really talking about a cost per square foot per pupil. And what the list, it takes time for us to review those plans and determine their eligibility. And we can't do that as a state, one, because it's only me. But number 2 is that we don't know right now, no funding is going to those schools. So how much resources do we put into reviewing those applications? So just keep that in mind when there's a big request, whether it be Concord or others on the list. It's likely that a lot of their ask is not going to be eligible for building aid. They play against the same rules as the other schools that are building other school districts.
So Amy, do they automatically go to the top of the list?
So, yes, sorry. Yes, they do not. Currently, they would if they're, which I think is another problem. In the next biennium, those 17 projects will only stay on the list if their voters pass, but the state did not have enough funds. Which in theory sounds good. If all of those schools went to their town vote, then you'd kind of get a read. But the reality is a lot of those schools are so far down the list that they're just assuming that they're not going to get building aid. So they've either nixed their project altogether, and maybe some communities have gone forward
Have any
without.
of the other 14 schools gone to their voters?
I think there are some, we'll see as these schools start to have their meetings, but we'll know at the end of the month whether they'll have some that have gone. We've heard, but we haven't tracked all their warrant articles.
I haven't heard. I have no.
How many of those on this list are gone?
I mean, essentially, if you're below number 5, I don't think that those schools are really even thinking that they're going to get any kind of building aid.
But there's always the other side of that. There's always the other side of that coin because one session ago, my school district ended up on the top of the list and went to the voters, and the voters said no. So it doesn't, you know, it's just not a guarantee. And I've pointed out all the time, without having the assurances of whether the voters actually want this, it's somewhat unfair to make the state evaluate all of these projects when we know virtually some of them aren't going to the process, aren't going to go to the process.
There must be a lot of man hours in that, women hours, and on that too.
Yeah, it
for an
is.
engineer.
It's,
Engineering hours.
It is good. It's good. It's also good, in my opinion, for the Department of Education to understand those project needs too, and be in school buildings and understand those projects. So they're certainly not wasted hours of being in those 17 buildings. What is wasted hours is the school districts that have spent money on these applications and time. They are difficult applications to put in when they have no idea what kind of funding is available, which again, pushing that timeline helps. I was brainstorming this morning on an alternative
Why don't you
idea,
explain your brainstorm?
and I don't know, it really is just a brand new idea today. So the way lease aid works, which is a portion of 198.15, it's for lease aid payments for charter schools, is that it funds everybody on the list, but it takes how much is available that was appropriated and takes and prorates everybody. That would not work under the current scenario because we don't know, they're applying so well in advance and we don't know how much is appropriated. But with a timeline like this, it could work. I mean, I think it could work. Where you know how much money, people apply, you get your pool of applicants, and then you prorate everybody. It would do a couple of things that I think would be good, is it would target those smaller projects and they would no longer have to compete. We would not have to rank projects. That would be, I think, something. If you were wondering, like, you could spread out the 30 to 60%, you could really stretch that, 20 to 80. You could, that way your communities start at 20%, but then they get prorated based on how much aid was actually approved. And maybe they're only going to end up with a 15% award. But then those communities that are more at the higher end, maybe they're 60% communities or 70% communities. And maybe after proration, they only get 55 or 65% aid. It would be a way to kind of stretch that out. The other thing that would be important in that scenario would be that a lot of those votes wouldn't pass and you wouldn't be able to make changes on the fly. Like, oh no, now we are able to give you a little bit more. Instead, you'd have to make that money fall into the next year for the next category for the next proration amount. So with that, you'd still have to have a timeline where they're applying like now, meaning the time that the budget is being talked about. You'd still have to give them the amount that they were prorated at so that they know how much to go to their voters for. And that would stretch out money to reach everybody. So I don't know if that is even an idea to consider, but just putting it out there.
I think it needs more fleshing out
Yes.
from,
Oh, absolutely.
because I can almost instantly think of unintended consequences, but I guess they are, with, it may mean if we had that kind of a scenario, people may have looked at it and said, gee, we're gonna get money under some money. And so now instead of 17 applications, you had 54 applications or something like that. It may encourage, because they know if they apply, as I understand it, it would just be spread out by how many applications you
Yeah, and
got.
how
So
much
it
are
may
we going to
shrink.
fund it, and you prorate maybe a buck,
Right.
you get a buck.
Well, then keep in mind, you still would have to be eligible for building aid, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that
So
aren't
there's still
eligible.
evaluation.
There would, I wouldn't say, I mean, it's still building aid, it's still eligibility. And another thing that I'm not sure that a lot of people know is that you can't reapply for building aid for a 35, 40-year window. So, so you can't just keep putting in applications. You can't build a new space. Think of it as like credits. You get a square foot per person per student that you get credited. This is all done on paper, but you get credited. And if you come in for a building later on and you've used your credits up, then that isn't eligible for building aid. So another example, we do have an application.
not sure.
You know, you built a wing in 2010 that gets taken out of what
Should
your
new
eligibility is.
construction and renovation be in the same pot?
Ooh, good question.
Well, our renovations are, when we talk about renovations, we talk about full gut renovations. That's what's eligible for building aid. And a lot of
What's the
times,
percentage of building new? Is it 25% or, so you can declare something as a new construction if the cost of renovating exceeds a certain percentage?
60%, but that really just means you need to submit extra documentation.
Okay, all
So,
right.
and honestly, renovation costs are sometimes more expensive than new costs. What I think if you wanted to separate different categories, you wouldn't do renovation and new. You would more do big full rebuilds or re-renovations, guts, or the small projects like a
Well, okay, take a
vestibule.
Monroe.
They're a vestibule project.
That's a vestibule project. So that would be a renovation project, correct? Or would it?
Oh, that's an addition. It's an addition. It's part addition, part renovation.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the problem is they can't compete because they're getting security points, but they're not getting other points on their list. They're not getting consolidation points. They're not getting,
So that's the crux behind my asking you that. Renovation projects may not have all those extra points, but certainly for that one area, they're lacking. It might be safety, only safety.
But when we talk about renovation, a good example is Salem is a renovation. I mean, that's a renovation project. Salem, they were on the list last year. Salem and Allenstown were selected for building aid. Allenstown is a new school, and Salem was a reno with new space. But they are, I mean, it's like wall to wall, taking back down to the studs. When a renovation in building aid terms, it has to meet the criteria called substantial renovation, and those are they are bringing the building up to like new conditions, versus a renovation where you might think with a vestibule, really they're renovating, they have to move their admin spaces to make accommodations for their new vestibule. That is a different project than a substantial renovation project. We'd consider that an addition project.
Okay, the next part we really ought to get into here is the second part of the amending language. And this gets into the concept or the idea, are we moving towards another process, whatever it might be, whether we're flat funding or whether we're putting it totally on the local or whatever we may be doing? How do we get to that point? How do we wade through all these various ideas that I've heard on the floor? You know, there's a number of folks saying, isn't there a better way? You know, I'm never going to get something here, given the way the formula is set up. So if you look on the one, did I pass this sheet out to everybody, the amending language one with just the amending language? No. Okay, so there's a copy or two. And here's, you might give one to Alicia and to Jen.
Jamie, have
Do you have an extra?
Just as a real quick go through here, the Education Commission of the state says, now we're getting into the question, Jennifer asked for me, you asked for information about how states fund capital construction. And we did get this page back. It looks like this has the yellow marks on it. And you can see that there's a number of ways which are done there's examples for states here. It gives you some of the percentages and what states do what. There's also another sheet which I've handed you, which is, it looks like this right here, and it says, well, okay, they do it through, where's the money come from? Sales tax. That's how Georgia, Iowa,
Cross that out.
yeah, Iowa, Virginia. Then you go to lottery, that's North Carolina. These are just examples of states. State general funds, then you see Ohio. Excise taxes, Colorado. There's there's additional ways of doing it as well. That's informational for you. So that this is part of the discussion, which is in this amending language. The amending language has the amendments we just spoke of with Superintendent Taylor. But you can see on this amending language one on page 2 and 3, there would be added to this amending language for 452 to establish a committee, long-term sustainable funding formula for school building aid. And it would be comprised of committee members. It's not a commission, this would be a committee. And the committee shall, on lines 22 going on down, do those various things. And I put it out here because I'm open, and I think the committee's open to try and find out what do we really want to do. On line 23 on page 2, it says, study methods of ensuring long-term sustainability funding for school buildings and identify any source of such funds. Where is the money coming from? That's always an issue. B, consider whether the state's percentage share of a building grant aid should be a flat funded amount, same percentage for all, in other words, or allocated based upon a weighted equity criteria condition such as local district wealth and income. We take that into account now. Grade levels associated with the project, elementary, middle, geographic location, projected demographics, on and on the list can go. C, it's examine the fiscal impact benefits on the state and local districts relative to dispersing the state allocation share at the beginning of the project through payments then, or spreading them out over the term of the bond. This is just working sort of with the formula which we would have if the currently. Item D, study program eligibility criteria and process for prioritizing and ranking school building aid grants. That's looking at our whole process, whether that's correct or not. Examine other state school building aid programs to determine how those states are funding capital outlay for new construction and renovation projects. F, determine the need for a statewide facility condition assessment to better know, prioritize, and project anticipated 10-year capital expenditures related to school building aid program. G, review the building aid application process to ensure prioritization of facility improvement goals that clearly identify the relationship between facility utilization and operational program objectives of the school. Study any other issues related to school building aid grant procedures that it deems relevant. Solicit testimony for any individual or association that has information on it. There's so many ideas floating out there. This is going to have to be a committee that would do that. It can be done on the side with a task force. It could be done through DOE. It could be done on the side by a group of people huddling together and saying, well, here's a proposal where they submit it in the form of their own legislation. And that may happen. There's, you know, down in the southern part of the state, there are people who want to get reimbursed of all the things they built during the moratorium. That ain't going to happen.
Hope not.
Yeah. So here we are. How do we go to that next step? I'm asking. Greg, you've been on the School Building Authority, and you've communicated to me often some of the concerns and issues that you've seen, and that we need to address. I've done the same thing, and Amy's done the same thing too.
We are the squeaky wheels. I think it's interesting that it seems, you know, to all things there's a season. I think it seems that school building aid has we've been squeaking enough that it's now almost reached a fever pitch, and we start hearing those same things in a number of different meeting rooms here. We have to do something with school building aid. What? Well, I don't know. But I think that there are a number of behind the scenes processes going on, and I think we will see, whether it's this year or next, new proposals coming out. We just heard one today,
Well, that was
I
that
understand.
was just a nighttime dream.
I understand. But that's where these things come from.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm not a fan of committees. I don't think this approach will come out with our solution.
So
I've
then
just
the
seen
question is,
enough.
how do we get to where?
I think
How do we get it coordinated?
I think we are. I don't know if it's coordination is the solution. I think what happens is there's a number of really bright people. When you have 426 people in a hive knocking into each other, which is, I think, one of the benefits of us being here instead of being on Zoom. I think lots of different ideas start percolating. I think that's why in the last couple of years we didn't see a lot of new ideas come along, but we are. I've heard five or six that people have asked that talked about already. So my guess is the process is happening without this kind of a. I belong to two different groups already that are ad hoc that are looking at ways of doing something different. I think that's where the solution is going to come from, much more so than this. Because
Would it
I've
be-
never seen, for instance, a school choice committee that comes out with any kind of a acceptable school choice. But we've seen 5 or 6 different school choice options come through legislation that just percolated from individual ad hoc committees. So that's what I think will
Okay.
happen.
Can I-
As much as I
Sure.
recognize the work that you've done in this to get here, I personally
Well,
don't see
there's not a lot of
that.
work there. It's just running, that takes
That
maybe
is-
2 hours.
It seems to me that the core requirement needs to be a database that we can all access with the same eyes. In other words, if we did an assessment statewide of the condition of the schools, and therefore from that, when they're likely to need improvement, replacement, addition, whatever, we could make that assumption from that database. And then you can start looking at where you're going to need to put money. And
You're-
you'll have some concrete data about, look, it's only gonna last 17 years, so this is when it bears out and needs to be fixed or repaired or whatever.
I think that's true, except you're assuming that the solution that may come out of some other program is going to include the state funding of those solutions.
I don't- yes,
You may be
I
one
agree.
additional step
I
is what
agree.
I'm saying.
Yeah, that, I think most of the people in the state also are assuming that.
Well,
Whether or not they should is another whole question.
right, it is true. I do think that there are a number of people that assume that, and then you ask, why is it we don't do state building for fire and safety? And they say, yeah, that's true. Why don't we? So it is, I think there is a larger issue. I do agree that that would be helpful if that existed now. And Amy has done some of that work. We've scratched out numbers of how many schools there are and how long they live and all of that kind of stuff, and come out with a rough estimate. But again, there's a fundamental question of how involved does the state need to be in that issue first, and then you branch off that decision tree.
I perhaps may be reacting to my confreres of the other persuasion who always go to the status quo. And they consider that the status quo is going to continue forever. And so I may be overreacting to that anticipation.
Well, the status quo has not continued here. We've been through a moratorium. There's been no quote. So here we are now. We have situations where we have buildings which were built 100 years ago that just aren't cutting it. Or, and of course, then you have the other one saying, well, they're only half full, so, figure it out.
Well, which is another big piece of this. I mean,
Yeah.
it built into that structure, into that conversation, and I didn't hear it in your bill, but somewhere in there, we need to look at these from that prism of what do these buildings turn into if we're no longer going to have sufficient students to fill all of them. I know whenever we have schools before the school building authority, generally it's Frank that says, what else can this building be looked at? And have you looked at what it can be converted to? Is it an assisted living facility? Can it be, something else?
Well, I was going to say, the largest growing demographic is people who look like me.
I'm there. But I think there's a lot of big pieces. It's going to be almost impossible, I gotta believe, to have a single document solve every issue. I just can't see that happening. There's how many schools in 600 roughly, or 400 to 600? Yeah, I think there's 400 to 600 different solutions. Is what I'm.
See, on
Afraid.
page 6 of this first document we looked at, there was a comment I made on the side. And the comment reads, discussion item. Offset cost of new construction, sale amount of previous property or use of old facility. Those are questions.
We tried to
CP, you
attack
said-
those. We tried with
Yes,
allowing-
we have, but so where does the revenue come from, the sale of that property? Does that go back into new construction? Offset the bond or what?
It's another part of
Yeah.
that question, isn't it? To me, all of these things are somewhat linked. A charter school is a public school. The public built these traditional public schools, even if it was 100 years ago. Somewhere there's a linking that those children in that traditional public school that may be now transitioned to a charter school should have equal access to that same building.
I'll take my own home community right now. We have the grade school, the elementary school in Woodsville, which is an older building. It's still usable if they can renovate parts of it. But it's right across from Walmart on 302 and Route 10, right at the intersection. That's prime commercial property.
Yep.
So if they decide to raise that building, tear it down, what are they going to get in return for if they sell that property off? Would that be then used towards the new?
Aren't there's existing RSAs on that, right? For
I don't know.
or in your charter your
Yeah,
charter.
but see, if they don't want to go to the charter school,
No. I mean, if they
so they want to use that.
that's a different story. But if inside your document somewhere along the line, and I understand there's school districts that don't have, because yours is a cooperative as well.
Well, that's a cooperative of one town.
Yeah, but inside there is a document for that somewhere.
That's because
It does say what happens when you sell that property. Or it should.
I'd have to go look at it.
Yeah, I know.
Because we brought all
I
the
think
old
that
stuff from
question's
the road
already in
across
there.
the road and used those portable classrooms at Woodsville Elementary School, and those portables really weren't worth dragging across the street.
Yeah.
But it raises a question, so if they
It
want to
does.
sell that property off to offset the costs of the bond,
Can you?
can you?
I don't know. I would look at your internal documents first.
Well, you're the school building authority, you're supposed to be checking all this stuff out.
Oh. It does, there's a million, this work session is great, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But there are a million
So
little
let me ask
questions.
a question, Amy, of you here. So there's a number of ways that we can try to coordinate this, so we don't get a lot of disjointed type proposal coming in legislative wise that haven't been thoroughly thought out, and that's our job to filter through all that. There needs to be a coordinating organization. That, to me, would be the State Board of Education or the Department of Education. If you're going to set up some kind of, like you do with curriculum, a task force to look at how we're teaching mathematics or social studies. Would it not be better to have, rather than a committee, that the department set up some kind of a process where we're going to start looking into, sort of like you've done with these minimum public school standards. You had that, you contracted that service out. You wouldn't have to necessarily do this unless, you didn't have the time for that. But we're to look at, where is this present school building aid process working? Can we tweak this to make it work better? We can do some of that right here. We will. This timeline has to be done. But are there a number of areas in there that are just not doing what we want it to totally do right now? Partially due to the way we're funding it, and is the funding process correct? All that should be discussed, but is it better done through the department?
That's probably a good question for the commissioner.
Yeah.
But my guess is that he probably would think that that's a good idea. I know from other conversations that he's already thinks that it's important for other conversations to come about how building aid can be functioning, and thinking outside the box is definitely his
Talking
favorite
aside,
thing
I've
to
heard it
do.
from
So
Drew as well, that maybe that's the appropriate way to get this thing done and done, quickly, because that could start right now.
right,
And-
I think it's going on right now. So
It is.
I think having that, whether a study committee comes up or not, I think that probably process is going through. And,
My preference is to work with the department on it, not have another committee.
Right.
The Speaker of the House does not want any more committees.
right.
So Rick, I know,
For a reason.
I heard what Greg was saying. And I know that there are numerous people talking about putting bills and whatever. Might it make sense to use all of that legislative creativity, but have like whether it's
Clearinghouse,
that's what I was thinking, clearinghouse, and then I was thinking, or just
gatekeeper.
like a conference or a day for that, set up somewhere for them to all come together and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is my,
It's a
before
hard
they
thing.
actually submit bills or
I think
something.
I think that's a hard. I hear what you're saying. It's a hard thing to have people sitting listening to all 14 different concepts, because you will like one piece out of each
Yep.
of them, and you really end up nowhere. Where you still need is that individual from that. What I would see is someone walking down the hall and saying, hey, I'm going to steal that piece that you had on this. Would you support it in my idea of doing this? Which is how
Right.
lots of legislation occurs.
It certainly is. And that's why I wasn't sure what form it should take, but a form, not as a final, coming up with a final, but just some way of getting all of these people planning these bills to hear what other people are planning so they can do just exactly that. Oh, that would work right in here, right?
Well, what you're seeing is a piece of that here, right
Right.
now, in this kind of a work session, and that's where I kind of disagree that it should be done through the department. Although I'm not opposed to that, because I belong to one or two of those, but
Yeah.
it is, I do think that you have a role here too, the chair in House and Senate, to have a work session or two and bring in one or two people with ideas and discuss those.
But see, there's the commission process, like public school infrastructure. but that's not gonna hack it. That's not gonna do it. I like the idea of it being the gatekeeper or the clearinghouse really belongs with the Department of Education or the State Board of Education or somebody that's linked to
I
it.
don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Well, there's gotta be somebody that's going to keep this moving.
Well, I
part
think
of-
that's the legislature.
Well,
Yeah, because part of the
Then you need a
problem,
committee. Or you
Well,
need to have
no.
somebody assign that responsibility.
You could do a subcommittee, just like we're, a work session, just like we're doing here. Put it out publicly and say, hey, all you guys who are looking at ideas, this is the date we're gonna do this, come and share your ideas. That's what I meant by conference or whatever,
Yeah.
just a chance for
Here's
people
the
to sit
problem.
down at the same
because
time.
I think if you have the DOE be the gatekeeper, it's hard in some cases for the DOE or the people in the DOE to have the same blunt conversations that that legislators have in work sessions.
I don't know, I
I-
think that for
that's
the
just
matter
my-
of
that's
transparency
my
and all that,
experience.
we should have open ability to communicate and say our ideas. We've certainly done it here today.
Well, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right,
This
but
is what
Amy
it
is
needs,
somewhat hampered
just
to be
like we
able to
did
say
here.
what she really thinks. Yeah, see?
Well, we could continue to do it in a form like we have here and just keep that process going.
And then run it by, but then
And-
bring in
and-
Frank and say, hey, what do you think of this?
But we'd have
You
to
know?
have meetings posted and work sessions and we'd have to have, certainly, we'd have to have need for technical support along the way.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a formalized process either.
It doesn't have to be formalized. This is really not formal here.
No, but you can imagine if this room was full of the usual characters here, we wouldn't be having the kind of same conversation that we're having now.
No, because you'd have different perspectives.
But
And-
you would be having side conversations, you would be having all kinds of things that it's not as productive as small informal groups.
Mainly because a lot of the people who are here have other priorities that for them transcend the ones that we're talking about.
Well,
If their idea is, what will this do to the number of people employed to do this and that, and in this union and that union and so forth?
Could be.
Their priorities will be that, I can guarantee it.
yeah.
Well,
so-
I think we gotta be very careful in that, they will have ownership in their ideas,
Yes,
but that's what you want to hear. Because if we're gonna get to where we are gonna have something that's gonna have some longevity, we gotta know that.
right. But if you have that diversity of ideas,
Yeah.
it's hard for that type of group to come into a focus of legislation. That's why we don't go to Reps Hall and do legislation in Reps Hall. We do legislation on your computer and my computer, and then we come and testify and try to get consensus that.
I think you have to have some initial part where you're gonna have different ideas coming forward. Without one idea being squelched and another person bullying this idea forward. Then what we gotta do is try to get a process of whittling it down, like you're doing an interview. You might have 25 people interview for a job, you wanna get it down to 5.
Yeah.
Then you're gonna pull those 5 in, then you whittle it down maybe to 3 or 2. Then you have to make the final decision.
How have we ever written legislation like that?
Pardon me?
How have we ever written legislation like
Well,
that?
it's, that's,
No, I'm just.
that's management,
Do you-
that's.
I know, but do you have an example of this is a whole new thing for what you're describing? It may be idyllic. but
Always before, we've always brought a boilerplate forward, and so we're gonna work off the boilerplate. We brought, the last go around in this, when I did it, we borrowed some stuff from Maine. And we brought people in and we started writing this, and also basing off what Ed Murdo had in the past over here at Department of Education.
Right.
And they were basically
No, but
funding
I'm-
everything.
But I'm saying, even let's take some big project like the EFA project. We didn't all sit in a room and get divergent ideas and get those top five.
But that's a new concept. That was new.
But
This
that's
is
what
something
this is
that's,
going to need to be, the same thing, new.
but it's still dealing with the same topic, the brick and mortar of a school.
But we need a new concept, just like the EFA was new.
Why do we need a totally new? There,
Okay.
see, you're
Because
already
it
coming
isn't
in.
working like this.
How do you know it's not working? It's working for those that got the.
It's not working
So,
for most of the
so it has
school
some
districts.
issues that have to be fixed, or we have to retune the whole thing. But we're still dealing with the same topic,
Well,
this age-old topic, schoolhouse. I can show you back in 1887, when the Commission on Education said it's one of our top priorities, schoolhouses.
well, EFAs were
understand.
dealing with education. It's the same topic,
Yeah,
totally new way of doing it. And I
You
think
know,
that we need
there
to,
are things that, you know, I do think you need input from, look, this project that Frank put together or discussed for Manchester, that this public-private partnership, that's a whole concept that that needs to be fleshed out and could be submitted as legislation if legislation is needed. I don't think it was for Manchester. It was floated to Manchester and Manchester rejected it.
Yeah.
But that's a whole. I understand that it's within the building aid realm, but it's a whole new idea of how to provide school buildings to a community, or locate all kinds of things. So it is a new idea, to take Alicia's comment, because you first have to decide whether you're going to tweak an existing state-funded, state-directed, state-coordinated process, or you're just going to enable districts to do something and innovative and show them different ways of making that happen. It's kind of like the risk pool idea that we came up with for special ed funding. That is a different idea and just enabling them to do that.
and that was coordinated through whom?
Some guy,
Named Frank.
well,
Yeah, well, yeah, he was very much involved with it. You were involved with it.
no, I understand. I'm using it as an example of.
I just think that, you need somebody that's going to give you some support from the management of the whole process to,
That's one way.
and to ensure that it's going to move forward, that it's moving forward constructively. We're getting different focuses, different perspectives, but we're also having meetings called, and somebody has the responsibility for scheduling meetings, all that. The management is important.
Can be.
And or else you can just do it totally on the side, but then you lose that air of transparency, of openness.
well, the other, that sounds more like end process than beginning process. When you're brainstorming, and we're really in brainstorming part, brainstorming, no ideas are bad ideas, right? Everybody just puts them out there. So you do some brainstorming first and let all those people with their ideas, like
That's what's coming.
Daniel Popovici Mueller was from, and he's on finance too, and he's got a completely different idea of how to
Right.
fund school building aid, right? And there are other people who have other completely different ideas. So you do the brainstorming, because that's how you come to solutions, is you start with brainstorming. And you put all the ideas out there. And when you put them out there, you don't judge any of them.
And taking that same scenario, I've already met with him, and he's saying, what kind of technical support can you give me in this whole process to better understand some of these things? So that's exactly what we're looking for. You can't do it in isolation. You're going to have to get the support from Amy or from Frank or from you.
Right, but sometimes the transparency that you talk about is further down the road.
The formal, yes, is later down the road, but you're still at the beginning. You need to have a working administrative type group of some kind that's going to be able to coordinate this and try to get it all together. And then you're gonna have to go through the process, a more open process, but you have a working group. And I think that's what we have to have, is now how do we form a working group? Now, as a legislature, that we can't do. We can do it by way of commission or committee, or we can have work sessions which are like this.
Or
That's
you
what
could
I was
have
saying.
ad hoc,
But
and
see,
that's
if
what
you
I
have a
think-
work session
that's what
like
I
this,
prefer.
how did we end up having this meeting? Well, I decided we're going to have
Well,
a meeting,
so-
right? Put it in the calendar, got some of the work
Exactly. You
started
Based on a
you-
bill.
based upon a bill, or even if this bill hadn't been here, I would have done it.
Exactly, so you don't need the
Contacting
bill.
her.
Exactly, so you do the same thing. A person, could be you, could be you, says we're gonna have this working session, asks her to come, and that gives us her input, so all these people who come with their ideas can ask.
Here's the down.
That's the research portion.
But there's a downside to that too. You have people that may come to this kind of a meeting with microphones on and taping that don't want to say things that jeopardize their own community,
Right,
Well, that's
which is
true.
which may be why some ad hoc type approach you
Look at the
get.
funding commission we just did.
Yeah,
What, that was a
mess.
$500,000 funding. And did we have all those services available here in this building where we wouldn't have had to pay what we paid out to Carsey and everything? Yes. We got right back there in the back left-hand part of this room, research that's our research.
right.
And that research can be used by that group. In other words, there's going to be times when we have to get further than just
Right,
subjective
but we
stuff.
have other research alternatives
Yes,
as
there are.
legislators.
There are, but this is a research that, because ultimately, down the road, we're hoping to make some legislation
Right.
which would move us forward.
But most of the legislation, I think, does not come from a work session and open and transparent conversations. I think most legislation comes from in the hall, talking to your buddy,
yep,
or in the cafeteria.
or in the
I think.
cafeteria. An awful lot comes from there.
Well, there's a lot that comes the other way too. In
Yeah.
fact, I look at the bills this committee has passed out this year, and most of that came through a lot of deep work with other committees and.
I'm not saying it
and
can't,
outside.
Rick. I'm saying this,
Yeah.
you have to understand that there are pluses and minuses of both approaches.
There are.
And so I don't think it's necessary that you create one pathway for this bill, for these ideas to be fleshed out when you're giving up some alternatives.
No, all the other stuff is going on concurrently.
I think so too.
But then
And we
you gotta
agree.
get all these parts put together somehow. That's
And-
where you need to have that person that's gonna call this together and say, okay, we're working on that. Now you come up with your thoughts and ideas, and Brent, we're gonna have this general discussion.
This is where I always thought OLS could have another responsibility, which would be beneficial when they sit down with one attorney, like you used to sit with Anthony, and you could say, here's my idea for doing this, and Anthony could turn and say, have you talked with, Dan McGuire? Because he has a similar, I always thought there was a way of being a connecting system.
And they
but-
do have research too, that you go a little farther, and then, you can go over to the archives, and
Right.
I've gone that whole route
Me
with it.
too, yeah.
And it's, there's a lot more than we do than just with the Anthonys or the Jeffs of the world.
No, and we do need,
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, because you and I aren't gonna be here forever, there needs to be, well, I'm not gonna be here forever.
Nor am I.
There may be, we need to have some way of passing that institutional knowledge of how to craft a bill, a big idea bill.
Yeah.
Utilizing what's available. The good thing is, we've got people like Jen and Amy that we rely on that stay here, hopefully for long periods of time, but we're not teaching, freshmen don't have any clue how to they think that every idea that they have is the first time anyone's thought of it, and they don't, then are surprised when it's been brought up 13 times in the past, so.
Oh,
Okay,
that's why I was hoping, yes. You notice none of our freshmen are in the room
Well,
today.
you know, they should be, but it is,
But
it's a
They were
hard thing.
invited, they were invited.
Yeah.
It was
they were
suggested.
invited, it's just the fact that, you know, there's a lot going on for
I
one.
think everybody was exhausted
Yeah,
after because we've been meeting almost every day for the last 3 weeks. Well,
well, every day for
Since-
me for the last,
I was gonna say since
Last summer.
January.
summer.
You guys.
Yeah, okay, so what we'll do is, from, yeah, get back to, but I am gonna go forward with the amending language that we have here for 452, which is relevant to the timeline and to that possible change we have discussed today for Colebrook.
Are you talking about not the commission one, but I mean committee one, but this one that we've been looking at?
Yeah, the one that we're looking at, I'm not gonna put the committee on there, but I'm
Okay,
gonna
so-
put
but this
everything
one-
else on there, plus the
Okay.
scratch out of those 4 words.
Right.
Does that work, Amy?
I just wanted to also point out
Okay.
something I just realized on page 4,
Okay, which one are you looking at? here?
the regular amendment, not the
This
committee
right
one.
here? Okay. Yeah. Yeah,
The marked up one
With
that
the
you gave us, the amendment 3/2/23. Nothing to do
Wait,
with
wait,
it, nothing to do with the study commission. I
Okay.
haven't really read that much. But on the one that you have for the amended one.
Yeah.
Did this already go through? Was it already a proposed amendment? Okay,
no,
so,
this is just draft.
okay. So on page 4,
Yeah.
line 5,
Yeah.
page 4, line 5.
Okay, you're in this one right here. Okay.
Correct.
Because, but the amendment which I handed out, which is 902H, is this right here with, but it also has the committee on it. What it does, it doesn't include everything in the bill already, it only has certain amending areas.
So it says beginning July 1st of 2025, because this is supposed to talk about
Yeah,
the funding. However, schools submit April 1st. So I think that you need to make that beginning April 1st of 2025.
Okay,
They're actually, so schools, the way this amendment is set up. Should I go ahead? The way this is set up is that schools are applying a couple months before the beginning of the fiscal year. Originally, I think originally that used to say July 1st. The April 1st was pushed since,
That's actually the application. Do you think perhaps he was talking about the letter of intent or something?
no, it's just that, it's simply that this legislation becomes effective in 2023. However, the legislation also says beginning July 1st of 2025, meaning our next round of applicants, which is correct, beginning July 1st of 2025, we're going to start this process. But for those that are starting this process, they need to submit April of 2025. The third line down there, line 7. Correct. So
Well, yeah,
if you look at line 7,
Yeah.
line 7, it says April 1st.
right.
That April 1st is April 1st of 2025. But it is in a section that doesn't start
Doesn't start until
July.
afterwards.
Right. So,
Right.
so either you meant to put that applications were due July 1st, which originally was the case, but I think he moved that to a couple months earlier.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
think I would make that almost January 1st.
Well, that's what I was thinking,
that.
make it before the April 1st.
As long as it's inclusive of that date.
right, you just can't have it be any sooner than any other deadline. So,
So would there be a problem with saying beginning January 1st, 2025, and each year thereafter?
I don't,
Be considered for
believe
school
so.
building aid. Application shall be submitted no later than 1st immediately. Oh, wait a minute though. Of the fiscal year that immediately precedes the fiscal year.
what Which is correct, because April 1st is the fiscal year prior to the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. April 1st is the preceding fiscal year to the upcoming one.
Yeah, I know.
Where you were.
No, I know. Somebody had to, we have to split up for today. Everything went?
Yeah.
Normal.
Yeah.
I was looking at my modification over the former issue.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, so I don't.
You
I
got
think
my text?
it can change.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I just had to
Correct.
call my
Yeah.
wife.
Okay,
So there's that, that's,
July 1 or April 1?
January 1st.
change the. In
page 4, line 5.
January,
January 1.
because it has to be including April.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Where are you looking, Greg?
This is line, page 4, line 5, the
Okay.
one that's marked up.
It's really just an administrative
It looks like
type
this.
thing.
It's probably, there are ones on the, hang on.
There's a whole slug of them right over here.
It's just a technical.
That's just technical. And then the only other technical, the only other thing is that in the previous law, and maybe this was done on intention, and that's completely fine, but it is unclear in this revision what school districts can apply. In general, the only thing I think that you're now including that are not included right now is potentially public academies. So if your intent is to include public academies in building aid now, they're not currently eligible, which I'm sure they'd be happy to be eligible, but they're not currently eligible because the current law specifically defines what school districts are. This law, this amendment does not talk about what school districts are. If you leave it as is, when Pinkerton and Co-Brown ask me if they're eligible for building aid, I think I have to say yes, which again, I don't have a preference either way. I just want to, right now, the answer is no, because the current law specifically defines school districts as, and I can send you the language.
And
It's
this would include, as this is written, this would include Cobra.
correct. And if that's the intent,
Where is it?
Where is it that does
It's
that
by
in this right now?
omission.
it's by omission. Right now, the amendment just says school district. There's
Yeah.
no definition of school district. The current building aid law defines school district. It says school district is these schools, and these schools, and public academies are not included on that list. So when public academies ask me currently if they're eligible for building aid, I say no, because the law excludes them. But this does not define that. So again,
Okay,
and then that is it for,
and on page 2, we're good with, on line 5, taking charitable trusts, bequests, gifts, and insurance
Yes,
policies out.
absolutely.
Yeah, what we had the
Yeah, that's
superintendent
what I
of
just
schools in
gave
here
them.
from Colebrook. And they have a situation where the voters up there did not approve. However, they have donors that are willing to provide sizable hunk of dollar,
The local money.
local money. So that should be used. Right.
The way this is written now, if you look at page 2, line
5.
come off.
The state grant. Yeah.
And we kind of don't understand why that was there originally. I can't even imagine it this way.
Where are you pointing to?
Line 2,
Line 5 on page 2.
Charitable trust we can.
right.
That's been around for years, and I don't know why it's really there,
Yeah,
because,
that should probably come out.
yeah, that's what we're saying, yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
The first four,
Because if there's a generous local donor.
which they have, 2 million bucks.
That value shouldn't accrue to the state.
it actually also solves the charter school problem too.
Line.
charitable trusts, bequests, gifts, insurance policies.
We think should.
Yes.
And that works for Colebrook.
Yes, so leaving federal grants and
Yeah.
state grants.
Yeah, yes.
I'm fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine why it's there, but.
it's been there for,
I agree.
it never has. Well, we only had, what, 6 or 7 recently. Amy, when do you think that was put into law? Way back?
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, I've only been with the department since late 2015, but that is, my guess is well, actually, I do know, in the old building aid method of, I've gone through all of their financial calculations, and they always take that off the top of the project. So it's been in there for a long time. Meaning when we get an application, we're calculating the building aid award.
I cannot think about it.
Well, maybe they're trying to save money from the state's perspective.
Well, this is one theory, is that a long time ago, again, I don't know the dates on this, when you were able to receive CTE funding, building aid would pay on the portion, so CTE covered 75%, the remaining 25%, building aid paid 60% of that remaining 25%, and somebody said, we're not gonna have that happen anymore, and maybe that's when that language came into place.
That would still take the state funding or the.
Your amendment would, but my guess is that wasn't there, and that's why people could get funds on their CTE portion.
Gosh, okay, well, we don't need to worry about the history
know.
here. Let's just take the 4 words out.
I don't know.
Right, but we may want to find out if that same language is in the CTE.
Oh, actually, according to Superintendent Taylor, it was
No,
not.
it's not, it's not. Yeah, that's what she said this morning. And she's been dealing with the CTE issues up there as well.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, are you okay being the school building authority with what's on the bottom page 4 there? In accordance with criteria defined in subparagraph 2B, that is the responsibilities of, those are the responsibilities that are currently in law.
Page 4?
Yeah, you're dealing with the capability of the local to fund what they're doing. And
That would verify the ranking from that line, you mean? Line 27?
the school building authority shall verify the ranking submitted by the commissioner in accordance with criteria, and then it goes, and make a, well, I think they ought to do it in accordance with the ranking, but also discuss,
As the financial means and available resources,
well, okay, if down the road, we're going to get into charter public schools,
Oh,
how do you guarantee that they're going to have the financial ability to maintain,
so is that only pertaining to charter public schools?
well, any type of,
I know. Is that your intention? I guess I should have asked.
And this isn't opening it to funding charters. just
no, it's just putting policy in place now.
Is that your intention?
That was the initial intent.
No, but so let me say it again. Is your intention that this determining this financial means and available resources applies only to the charter public school?
No, well,
To everybody.
school district.
For example,
So how am I-
when looking at Colebrook this morning, she says we're tapped out, what, we're at $30 per thousand?
So how am I going to determine that the school district or the charter, how is that, how do you envision that?
Well, it basically, that area statute we're referencing is your
I
responsibility.
think they put together a statement from the district or the charter.
How does the district put together
They would,
their finance, something that I can use for financial determine their financial needs?
that it would be subject to approval at a notice, a notice.
Well, they have
school
the power
district
of
meeting.
taxation, right?
Right, and
So I would have to determine whether the community has,
no, the community determines that. And it would be subject to a vote at a school district meeting.
well, but wouldn't, for the full district?
Yeah.
So in terms of the timeline, though, if I'm approving the list, the district meeting is going to take place following 6 months later?
Sure, so if the district votes down the project, then it's not moving forward anyway.
Yeah,
It'd still be subject. to
But this
vote.
part takes place 6 months earlier than that.
Yeah, and they would be saying that, I mean, the project is still subject to a vote at that time.
Right.
So they're basically saying if the project receives the support of the voters, then the district does have the financial resources. in
Well,
place
but
to get
that's-
the voters approved.
But that's what happens now without this.
So I think this language essentially codifying it for school districts.
Well, but it, for my purposes, this is talking about me. This is saying the school building authority shall verify the rankings submitted to the commissioner. In accordance with this, and I have to determine that the school district has the financial means. I don't have that information 6 months prior to the meeting that you're talking about that they verify.
I think we're talking past each other
Okay.
on this. So, I mean, I think we're essentially saying the same thing. Well, hang on a second.
Yeah.
So what you're doing right now is you're saying, okay, here's your position on the list. Take it to your voters in March and let me know thumbs up or thumbs down. You know, if it's
Yeah.
and that's what this is saying, I believe, as far as school districts. For charters, I think it's totally different.
Well,
You know,
let's not get out of the school district, because I don't see how I am going to determine their financial means until well after I've already given my rankings to the school board.
But your rankings are based upon the criteria, same criteria that the department ranked on.
Yes. but-
And so you're just basically checking their mathematics.
Yes, but
All
you're
right.
adding this financial means.
What they did when they typed this over, the and before and in accordance with criteria defined, so you'd be doing the checking of to verify the rankings and in accordance with, what you're responsible, you do this, RSA, whatever,
To be,
2B, there it is. Determine if so I don't know if this is necessary in here or not. This is all add-in. It's not there now.
I don't know how I do it unless it's 6 months later. And I think I've already submitted my report to the Board of Ed.
By October 15th.
Well,
That's what it says right here. Then
well,
by
that's
November
changed.
15th, they have
Used
to
be
approve.
December, used to be December.
Yeah, but that's why we backing everything off here.
So how, I still don't know before I hand my paperwork to the Board of Ed, how do I verify that school district's financial means?
So, Greg and I don't always see eye to eye, so I'm just gonna shout in here that I don't understand it either. So we're on the same page here, Greg. Because, no, right. So on the department's end, we receive these applications, and to the extent possible, we ask for their information on their application. We do a check on their debt ratio of their borrowings, and just alert them if they're above that, I think a 7% or whatever it is that they're allowed. But I'm not really sure what happens if there's something that we've got to submit this to the state board for publication, so I'm just not clear on what that would be, that's all.
So Amy, does a project, make it onto the list, ranking on the list prior to receiving, voter approval?
Correct.
District meeting?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so,
Which I think it's wrong.
I mean, I think, because now maybe somebody didn't get on the list for a project that gets voted down 6 months later. Say if you're taking the first 4 projects, the 5th project
Well, I
doesn't.
don't know that. I only give the 1 through 7, or in this case,
So-
1 through 17.
In any case, what you're saying is you can be on the list, ranked on the list, and then the question is put to voters in March.
Yeah,
Down
after I've already reported.
after you've already reported who's on the
Yeah.
who's on the list. It
it's a cart before the horse.
Yeah, and sometimes the voters need to hear that we've been approved for state funding prior to, well, I think voters like to know how much they're gonna be getting themselves into. Because they're either getting into 100% of the project cost, or they're getting themselves into 60%.
And this is the conundrum
Yeah.
that you run into constantly.
But this is also the conundrum that this new timeline fixes.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Except we don't, I still don't, this part, I think I would cross out. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Can your,
Well, if it's gonna be done by the department, then I get it. It's being done somewhere.
Well, I don't,
I mean, to the extent practical, we don't know if the warrant article is going to pass. We certainly do not give them money until they have passed a warrant article. Matter of fact, with this amendment, there's some language in here that specifically says that their warrant has to be subject to receiving building aid, which is different. And that kind of makes sense in this new system. Contingent, well, it says subject to receiving building aid, meaning it says projects with approval from the school district's legislative body to construct not subject to receiving building aid are eligible. But I guess that's not possible in the current system, because the current system, you don't know if money is going to be appropriated. But in this timeline, they're, like I said, they're applying now. The state budget comes out in July, they're getting ranked in November, they're going to their voters in March, and they can go to construction in the spring. So this law actually says that they have to have their warrant written based on building aid.
almost 2 years. Well,
Not,
still
it's,
2-year process.
well, not if they want to go construction that spring, because they don't have to wait for the state budget anymore.
can your approval be conditional upon that funding?
Well, the article may say that, warrant article.
Then the law currently says it's conditional, well, meaning they can't take funding if they don't have.
But could it be?
Actually, I like what Amy's saying, that if you put the warrant article, making it conditional on state funding, then you get the vote from voters. It doesn't actually have any tax impact until the state funding comes in and the project begins. I'm sure there's language that could be DRL language for that.
That I have always liked that for 2 reasons. One, it means that Amy and her team are not doing evaluation work on projects that don't have support from the
Correct.
community,
Correct.
which to me is huge.
Yeah.
But the downside to it is, by pushing that far early, you're having, and especially just take the last couple of years, trying to estimate what bond rates are going to be that far in advance.
Or lock in a cost, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the construction
Yeah.
costs and that.
Mhm.
So that's the double-edged sword of that.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not sure where you gain on one side, you lose on the other, and I'm not sure what's right.
So how do other states address that time?
Well, they have different.
There, it's that, we gave a lot of stuff out on the Education Commission states, they're doing it differently, ECS, it's different
Well,
everywhere.
what's the one that makes the most sense?
Well,
Well,
I'm sure there is something for us there, but we haven't read through it all.
The approval.
Some have, well, I guess from that standpoint, you're right. I haven't looked at it, so I can't
Yeah.
say, but, they do, the funding is different in every state, you know, some have dedicated. But it is, I don't think I know whether there is a, you know, ooh, this is the winner, because everyone is doing it differently, so there's clearly not one winner, you know. I don't know what works here. And we've only worked really with the one system where we're kind of guessing what amount's gonna be available for the next year, and so we're giving almost contingency approval because we're ranking, but we don't know who won that ranking.
On the timeline that's being proposed in 542, when is the final approval? Is there like a
The final approved by the State Board of Education? That's, November 15th in this.
That's November 15th.
Well, see, January 15th is when you have to notify now.
Yes.
But according to this right here, if you're looking on line 15 on page 5, the State Board Education shall approve and publish the descending rank order list of approved eligible school construction projects by November 15.
So you moved that.
We're,
Well,
yeah,
it's also, keep in mind, this is not the same January that you're talking about or the same November. It's forward.
That's-
We didn't move it back. We moved it forward.
So it's really not
It's not January, it's actually that same December,
10 months.
later, not earlier. It's, all these deadlines are later,
yeah,
not
yeah,
earlier.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's either 4 months before the district meeting, or it's
6 months after.
8 months after the district meeting, assuming March 15th meeting.
But see that,
But the key is that it is the November of the year the state voted for the budget. So it's like, if you think of it right now, it's this November. So money comes in, money gets appropriated, projects get ranked, and in November, the list comes out. So that voters can go to their, so that towns can go to their voters already knowing what the appropriation is for building aid. They're going to their voters in March of the same fiscal year of year one of the biennium. And they're actually gonna go again if they need to.
But in the old process here, January
before.
15th, we let them know the warrant articles are already being published
Yeah.
and going forward to the voters for their scrutiny. And then you meet in March.
But even worse is they're going without knowing the state appropriation.
Yes.
And with no commitment from the state. This allows them to get that commitment first.
double the amount in one of these years to make this prospective instead of retrospective, would we have to, you know what I mean? Would, like in this budget, in order to make this work, in this budget, would we have to put in 200 million?
No, this doesn't start until July 1st, 2025, or the change we just,
Money has to be in.
the money would be for the projects that we already ranked. Those top 3 projects, Rochester, Colebrook, that list that we just have, that rank of 17, they would be talking about dollars of this state budget. For the following state budget,
In March, in this month,
right, this month.
in this, still not knowing.
That's what the problem is. They do not know. But the next round, we're gonna collect applications. We're not even gonna have a list at this time next budget cycle. People are just gonna start to apply. Then the state's gonna appropriate money. They'll know who applies, but
Stop not taking applications.
correct,
So we only take
before.
applications every 2 years.
Now we'll be taking them every year. We'll be taking them every
In the
year
future.
by April. And so in April, then the budget comes, that money is appropriated. We can tell people where they are on the list. They can go to the voters knowing, because we have money already. We already have that money. And they are waiting, instead of them waiting for us, we're waiting for them to pass their warrant article. Subject to receiving building aid, because they know they'll receive it because we already have it waiting for them.
But that year of estimate, just that first group is a really hard time estimating that far in advance what bond rates or what.
What do you mean that first group? That first group will be 2 years from now. Like picture 2 years from now, we're gonna go, because that's when this would come into effect. They're gonna be applying in April, so next month they'll be applying for construction dollars for the coming spring. That's good timing for them. Versus right now, they're like 18 months ahead of time.
Year.
I think
It'll be a year later, which for a construction project isn't that bad. Right now, they're almost 2 years out what they have to estimate those costs on. Right, I received that 17, the application group of 17. They submitted their application to me in the summer of 2022, last summer. They are going to completely miss, even those top three projects, they're gonna completely miss this construction season because we don't know what money they
They
have.
don't know because they haven't been approved. They have.
They
Well,
don't,
the money hasn't
the
been.
money
approved.
has, so there, if money becomes available,
If they go to voters next couple weeks, right? They still don't know.
Right, they still don't know.
And they're still,
waiting.
they still estimated.
Greg, even under present day circumstances with the public school infrastructure fund, remember how we appropriated dollars
Right.
and even 6 or 7 months later,
Right,
the cost of doing business had doubled
right. If they could
on the
find
southern part, if they could find anybody to do the job.
Just a thought, you know, we keep talking, we're talking about, voters that meet either before the state board
Yeah.
decision or voters that meet after the state board decision. What if we sandwich? What if there was a preliminary district vote and then a final district vote with the board decision in the middle?
I'm not sure I followed that,
I'm
but
not fine with
So a preliminary where the school board has their you know, their design team and their construction team, you put it out for bid, you get a construction quote, you bring it forward to the school district meeting in March 15th. And I know that doesn't apply to cities and stuff, but the idea might apply. And you put on the warrant, would the voters, whatever the DRA language, voters make preliminary approval of a construction project costing no more than, pick the number, $20 million, whatever you got from the contractor, less the school district's current building aid ratio, because that, not contingency, because the ratios are already, have already largely been determined, independent
30 to
of
60%.
priority, right? So 30 to 60, so we know where our district sits in that. Subject to state board approval of the building project and final approval.
So they would get two votes.
And
They
they-
would have to go through two
Yeah,
votes.
because these projects take 6 to 10 years even to get through a school district, you know, cycle anyway. Well, you know, you've got, you
Yeah.
generally have multiple years you have to bring it forward, so.
New plan.
Well, it depends, you know, the Haverhill one went through in a couple of years.
Well, I mean, you could bring it forward without, you know, outside of the building aid, which is what
Yeah.
Hopkinton did, and get it through in the 1 year. But if you wanted to do the building aid process, do preliminary and then final with,
But if you don't do the building aid process, you might not get your building aid because don't you have to have, you can't apply for building aid after you've started the construction project.
correct.
no, and districts would still be able to make that decision on their own.
Yeah.
If they
Would
want
that
to do
be
it
part of
outside.
the- Would that be part of the preliminary, then if some, would they vote to do it regardless?
Well, well, if they started it, then they,
No, that's
Then
the
they'd be-
difference, right? But in the preliminary warrant,
Yeah.
could they say, could they have one or two things? Would you approve with building aid and would you approve without?
suppose you could, yeah. And then if the, without building aid approved, then the school board can move forward with the project.
For instance, Nashua, Nashua built it with no building.
Yeah.
They applied, but we're building it anyway. So I was trying to think of in whether they would be in the preliminary or in the final.
Yeah.
Whether they,
You know, and this is, I like this sort of stuff because, you know, you just put ideas on the table.
we were just.
He'd be here all morning.
But it, but I think it addresses the point you brought up, Greg, which is, and Amy, that, you know, quotes get stale fast, bond rates change fast. So you're always sort of working,
They probably did now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could do
so, you know, you
Jeez.
You're basically working with fresh data at the time you apply. I mean, at the time you do preliminary, and then at the time you do final.
Okay, you think about it. Well, I'm gonna have my lunch here soon because we got another one starting at 1.
Okay.
So I guess I go right back down to the bottom of that page 4. Do we want that language in there or not? You're not a fan either, Amy.
Then let's take it out.
Then take it out. Take it out.
And it's not that I'm not a fan, I just don't understand it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I think you're doing it already in school districts.
It's in the preliminary
Yeah.
application.
okay.
But I think with charter schools,
Ah.
that's a complete.
That's a whole different game and that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
That's why I said, let's talk about this one first.
Yeah, okay. We're all on the same page then. So that will come out because we gotta get this over to OLS. We gotta act on it.
So you're taking out the entire thing, or are you putting back in what was crossed out?
Is this on the docket for Wednesday?
Yes. So it would read, the school building authority shall verify the rankings submitted by the commissioner and make a written report of findings.
So all of the, even what was crossed out in here. the amount-
That'd be out. It just would say, and make a written report of findings and submit a list in descending rank order to the, whatever, for approval. That's what you're doing now.
I'm doing the same thing, I'm checking Amy's,
You're just rubber stamping.
Until a new process comes up.
and then until we do something.
But if we start getting in the realm of other organizations like charters, there's going to have to be some real look at, do they have the ability to bond or pay for it? And maybe they would have all the donations in the world.
So Representative Ladd, maybe you said this, but on page 5, on the top 2 lines, on
Yeah.
the strikeout, I think that and make a written report of findings also needs to be struck out. Which maybe you already said. Because it does say, it already says and submit. I think that written report of, is that existing?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. I just was thinking it says and submit a list. What written report of what's the difference between a written report of findings and submitting the list?
I'm sure that if Greg had made a
Okay, that's fine.
written report of findings
I
on
thought it was
Haverhill, he would have
referring
written
to
up some
the
other
financial
things.
report.
Is financial means part of the application process?
When you say financial means, I mean, they state where they are anticipating their funding sources coming from. And we do a debt ratio check with DRA. You're not allowed to spend more, have so much debt.
Okay,
And
so you get that information
Correct.
anyway, even with this struck out.
Correct. Yeah. And really, it's just, we use that as a tool in case schools didn't know that, I mean, hopefully they do, but if this would exceed their debt, we would want to let them know it as soon as possible.
To a certain extent, that written report.
You really don't need it then, just submit a list in descending rank order, that's what you're
Well,
asking.
if you go to the next sentence, that's when the written report.
Right. And it's fine. If it's existing
Yeah.
language, it hasn't caused any problems. I
That's
just thought it might
probably
be
why it's
hanging
there.
there.
Yeah,
I mean, it's only if,
Yeah. Yeah.
I.
yeah.
So you're gonna take out from.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Two.
point. No.
and
Yeah, that's all out. In accordance from, right after commission, school building authority shall verify the rankings submitted by the commissioner and make a written report of findings and submit a list in descending rank order.
We're gonna take out Nate from Nate to N, it's 2 and 3.
Why are we taking out in accordance with criteria defined in subparagraph 2B, which was part of the previous sentence? After the comma that you're talking about them.
No, that's not, if you look, that's not in current law.
I know, I just wondered why that isn't part of the funding part he was objecting to. That's why I was
Well,
wondering why.
the reason why it's there is that they can make a rank order listing based upon different criteria. But this right there said they gotta do it in conjunction with the same criteria that was used by Amy.
Right, so
I think I hear what you're saying though. You're talking about this bold new language that on page 4, right? That says in accordance with, I think you, most likely you added that for clarification because it also repeats itself further down.
right,
So,
so that's actually part of the previous thought, it's not part of the, financial means part. So why did you put it there? And why-
Yeah, it does say the same thing, doesn't it? So,
it's just repeated.
so I guess,
It can,
The page before, where we started crossing,
Right, I saw that.
read the sentence before that.
yeah,
That says the same thing.
so it's.
and then it says
so
it a
all
little
comes
bit
out.
later on in the following
don't need
paragraph too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's already there. Duplicative at
You
best.
can take out all.
Yeah, all the bold print,
Oh,
except for maybe that and.
you could, well, you could take out all the bold at the bottom.
No, take the sentence before the bold. The school building authority shall verify the ranking submitted by the commissioner. And then it says, and make her, and if we're taking out the report
Yeah,
finding,
yeah.
and submit a list of descending
Yeah.
reporter for approval.
Where it's in there, yeah, that's it.
And then it says right after that, if the ranking submitting. Actually, we are all right,
Yeah.
We're-
talks about.
if it's different.
Yes.
I thought it said the same. Ranking submitted to the commissioner. It does.
Does,
And submit a list in descending ranking.
And then Representative Lett is super minor,
Where are you now?
but on page 6,
Yeah.
at the bottom, it's a Roman numeral thing, line 25. I think that's supposed to be on line 25,
Yeah.
page 6. I think that's supposed to be Roman numeral 3, which I'm sure somebody would eventually, which means maybe the other Roman numerals are,
4 should be 3.
1, 2, yes, it should be,
yeah.
if we're going from the previous one.
Now,
Is
does
there-
this have the HB2
No.
language in it?
It does not, no.
So then on the next.
And then there's 4 on page 7.
Yeah. Oh, no.
No, and that, see, what,
Just note it, and then as you work through, just,
yeah, that
yeah.
basically it'd be 3, then 4, and then 5,
Then what's on 15?
5,
15
maybe 5.
should be 5.
Yeah, that's right.
OLS.
Yeah.
Well, I can look and see what OLS did do because we,
Fix it, yeah.
Maybe you have to have it so.
Which would be 4?
we need to really have it over there right off here today. Yeah, and I'm gonna try to get Jeff to do this.
So
The other
how
fellows.
do you want to treat this with respect to what's in HB2, what Caitlin sent over to us? Did you see that email yesterday?
No.
Caitlin said, yeah, we were in session, so Caitlin sent over the HB2 language with respect to building it.
And what,
I believe,
Did it
because I
have
did have
all
a
this in it?
conversation with her, I think that she was just sharing that information, since I don't recall if there's anything in there.
It's, well, it's now on the LBA.
But they were meeting
They-
this morning.
that will
too.
be- I don't know if they got to.
Because that's a more of the funding structure for the other 3 bills that talk about,
It had a bunch of points.
I'll have to look at that.
Just look at it quickly. Fiscal 2026. It had ETF rollover.
oh, maybe I'm thinking of something else, maybe.
Department retains 3% of the full appropriation. Got some 2025 stuff in here.
Does it occur with an 80% upfront?
I can't believe they would do that with 80% up front.
interest.
I don't, no, it doesn't touch the payout schedule. But that's something I wanted to talk about, though. I mean, obviously, over time, you can only do so many projects. But the question is how many, you know, do you want to do what, same amount every year? Or do you want to pick up some more early projects earlier in the cycle, given the fact we've had a decade moratorium?
Well, personally, I don't think you can look at, I think that you're seeing those projects that were affected by the moratorium,
Right.
by the fact that we're seeing 17
The stack up,
when we didn't see 5.
Right.
Only 5 in
right?
the prior year. But I don't, this, we had a slight conversation earlier. When you have, there's a way of being able to take care of smaller projects, you know, take care of 5 smaller schools, and then one Concord can equal those 5, you know, where does my ranking, you know,
Yeah.
when you're looking at it
Yeah.
from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, you're trying to say, gee, who am I helping more people by doing 5 small projects, or am I helping one big, 170 million project?
Right. And if you,
This is the,
but if you pour it out over 20 years, as opposed to 1 year, then you can get more upfront.
Well, that's the-
But then it's gonna dwindle as
yeah,
more years
the
go.
tail you look at.
Yeah, you gotta deal with the tail.
You've got, the building manager, the building administrator, or not building, the business manager from Concord testified, he thinks you guys in session.
Yes.
When, in finance, and his theory was that we're doing this wrong. That we should almost finance this as we go, and we can cover more applications.
Have the revenue come in as annual debt service.
Don't we pay more total taxes, I mean, or don't the townspeople pay more total tax? Doesn't that make the total taxes of the interest is much higher to do it that way? And then doesn't the project end up costing them in the long run more money?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they really want to do that.
Well, that's why we changed it to 80%.
We were trying
But-
to help towns.
But we were trying to get more
Right.
projects approved.
But that works if you're sort of all caught up. When you're not all caught up and you've got a backlog, now you're gonna have towns making a decision to go forward without any building aid, because they can't wait any. If you can only take so many projects
Or-
a year.
While the counter to that is, you now have a bunch of schools that are taking a look at not submitting building aid because they're looking for ways to handle their diminished demographics and see if they can thread the needle, and shrink their plant and materials before to match their demographics.
I mean, there's a lot of things
I
you gotta
know.
look at. I mean, Hopkinton moved forward with a project, 3 years ago because, interest rates, bond rates were so low. We're like, we're not gonna wait,
Yeah, I know.
you know?
There's,
That was a good
I
That was a
good
good-
decision.
I was thinking
Giving it now.
thinking,
Yeah.
looking to see how many applications are being filed this year.
Yeah.
You know, if I.
Well, that's right, that's
I would
right.
be playing around.
Well, see, this is all discussion we had, and this is just cleaning up this particular process we have.
Yeah.
We know we're gonna have to do a lot of work
This-
beyond this.
Right.
This is really,
And
this is not something
Well, I
happening.
think if it was a transition plan, we'd have a 20-year payment, on it. And then transit to get,
I'm trying to get out of this.
no, but I'm sorry, but to get back to more of a normal, post-moratorium, thing where we only get, 4 or 5 applications a year or something like that we can take care of. But right now, we've got way too many.
But we don't know if beyond this curtain, this transition, there is no building aid in its traditional form that the state is involved. Maybe something completely different. So,
What do you mean?
well, there may be flat funding.
Oh, there's a lot of different scenarios roaming around the halls right now, where we
I heard
go.
one of them.
Yeah, and so
Well, you-
there has to be,
Division two.
That's right. That's-
yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
there's some of that going on. But until all that stuff happens, we gotta clean up what we're doing.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
And
This
that's
is-
what, I'm,
And you're going with the idea, well, we'll only fund X number up front, and we'll take the remaining money and probably get a few more projects involved.
no, I'm
20%,
not saying you fund X up front. You still take on that 38% chunk or whatever the district is qualified for, but it's paid out rather than, 80-20 in that first year. It's paid out over.
that's what we're talking
over
about,
20
over the
yeah.
period of bond.
Yes.
Lifetime
yeah,
of the
yeah,
bond.
Exactly, so you just apply it to your, to.
Which is extending the chart that Amy is, which is basically our tail.
Yeah.
You're extending that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
But I'm saying that there may be a different, we may be living with that tail when we're in a completely different method. If any of these other ideas that are percolating come to fruition, we still would have this tail.
But you gotta recognize in the next 3 or 4 years, that tail's gonna significantly drop, right? And once that drops, there'll be more money available. We're doing this about 2 or 3 years too early.
Nothing we do is too early.
Well, what I'm saying is that tail is just gonna take us, and then we have that,
And
level-
we can't pay it off. That was one of the questions that Division Two,
yeah,
because we have money,
You wouldn't want to.
you can't. We're not.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're all different, it's a mare's nest of bond. And there's no.
Absolutely, right, but,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to.
I got you.
Hmm? I know, my lunch sitting in the front seat of the car.
Yeah,
We got a meeting starting up at 1,
I gotta go do pension stuff.
so we take that out. And this is just the front side, where you're coming from, Dave, right there, whether maybe we only, of the portion that's owed to that town, instead of 80%,
Mhm.
maybe it's a lesser amount. That, I think, is something that needs a little bit more discussion, and probably would need to get amended into the Senate or later.
I think so from a policy side, I think you're putting together a good policy changes in this. And then maybe if we want to consider payment schedule changes, the Senate would be the place. to
There
go.
also needs to be a wider look at the whole process of what that is, and we talked about how to do that, and I think we can do it through just a working group.
Yeah,
We don't have to have any formalized another commission or a committee. We can just do a working group right here.
Yeah.
And get a lot of people, and people come in with all their ideas, say, come share your ideas.
Don't you have to have a bill to do that with, as a framework? I don't know. I'm asking.
We don't, we can set up a work group on anything we
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
And that's another way of doing it, rather, it's the same thing as a committee, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
just talking about ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
That's the way to do it.
But while we're on ideas right now, the one payment works because it's the payment you get from building aid goes right towards the project, and then you bond the remainder. Right?
Exists.
And then,
Yeah.
then you get your 20 years of debt service on the bond. A 20-year payment works because the first payment you get is tied in with the first year that you have the bond payment.
yeah.
And you use that to help out with your debt service. A 5-year schedule doesn't work because now you're gonna bounce the tax rate. You're gonna be
Yeah.
hitting the
Well,
first
that's
5
true,
bond payments,
yes.
and then your tax rate's gonna change.
That's their,
Oh, you're saying that's just a local issue, huh?
No, but one
It is.
20 work, but numbers in between don't work.
well, if we go
So,
to this smaller, not 80% upfront, we have to recognize that we're hurting the towns.
Well, that hurts the property poor towns.
Well, well, no, I mean, Hopkins got value challenges too. But you're also hurting the towns that then have to move forward with a building project without any building building aid. Because
Yeah,
maybe they were
that's the
ranked,
difference.
they were ranked
I'm just
7
saying,
or
there
8.
there is a downside to doing, even though you think you can do more projects, you're still hurting.
Well, because they'll be paying that 3.5% on the 38% or the 60% that they would have gotten from the grant state. So,
So what we need to do is that we need that subsequent working group.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So we will do that, but I'm gonna get, some of this going with
Yeah,
OLS.
I think that makes sense, though.
So we can just, get the timeline squared away. I think the timeline's needed.
I still have to
You-
work through in my head why we're not either double drafting or pushing. I gotta work. I can't even verbalize my concern. I think if you just skip a year, it's really almost like
Almost. But what we need to do, we need that time to review these projects.
it would be great if, keep in mind, it would be great if there was a way of during 1 year of the biennium, Amy and School Building Authority was able to utilize that time to visit schools. And the second year, we just do this little pro forma, here's our scoring. Because right now, we're jamming all of those visits on both sides in,
Well, you're jammed into a month,
how do you visit?
October 15th and November 15th.
When you have basically the treasurer, the state fire marshal, me, and 2 other people that work full time. Not easy.
Well, it won't always be 17 projects every year. It'll be.
Well,
For a while, but see,
Yeah, but it will.
and there's a difference between new construction and renovation.
Well, if we only pick off a few at the top, it may be 17 every
we
year.
got 500.
They maybe have 2 pots,
Yeah,
new construction and
Absolutely.
renovation.
He's telling you how many.
maybe you apply to one program. or the
Well, we
other.
talked about renovation maybe just dealing with a safety issue.
Yeah.
Whereas the new construction's dealing with all those criteria. So new renovation's not gonna get any points because they don't have all those points.
Well, maybe another possibility too, Rick, would be two application ones, where it gets paid all at once in the first year, or over a 20 year.
You decide when
You
apply.
decide when you apply.
That's interesting.
I mean, it's just a. It's
So
just a
here's
thought.
another one. What if we expand public school infrastructure to handle renovations, and we have school building aid handle new projects?
That's another item.
Mhm.
Yeah, see, yeah.
Continuing conversation.
But if you've got a 1 payment program and a 20 payment program,
Representative
your
Ladd,
odds of
I,
getting approved might be better in the 20, but you're gonna get less.
That is.
Put that in this thing?
Interesting thing I've ever.
For this section,
Oh, come on, no, I say a lot of.
Well, that one I think is clever as hell.
And your amendment makes.
I've not ever thought about it from the.
did you get that to me, right, John?
I just submitted.
Okay.
And what I should do
Decision
is
tree
the
for the
existing
school.
language.
Mhm.
To have to
That's not
decide
say,
whether they want to pay now. I don't want to, your
It's just
your
198.15 currently
proposal
defines school districts as
lets them
X,
decide
Y, Z.
what their
And then
future
school
looks
Yeah.
like. I
Okay,
don't
I'll look at that.
dictating
Again,
what
I don't care either way.
their
Yeah.
payments gonna look.
Good.
You know,
I mean,
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, chew on that one. Yeah.
So where's this next meeting meet?
I don't know, I was gonna ask you.
Well, it's a Senate.
So it's gotta be over there.
It's gotta be across the street somewhere.
Mine is not. Yes,
I'm gonna go get my lunch in this front seat of my car and I'll coming up.
I'm gonna eat this.
Everything up to you.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna go home and eat lunch.
All right.
I'm starting my weekend.
I'll call you.
Teacher shortage?
What's that?
Stuff in.
It's,
John, do you have a minute? Are you running?
Always have a.
I want to bounce tonight.
Yeah, come on here.
Every time I see it on the calendar.
I want double pay, for having participated in two different discussions simultaneously.
No, but
And that was, I mean, that was, we were talking about education stuff, because there were both the Senate and the House. So,
Oh, I got home last night. Yeah, at 8 o'clock, appointment at 8.
you did, you did. Oh, she. Where was Swan? Where's Swan? Oh, Concord. Yeah.
So we look at the,
well, no, I figured if I.
the knee that he picked was perfect. She said it's not the only time I have problems. is when no problem. Okay, no problem. He said, look, I've got 3 priorities. First priority, second priority, third priority.
That
Keep it
depends
fun.
Mm-hmm.
on whether we're going to the teacher shortage thing. And that's what the Senate.
No cartilage. Yeah.
Except we will have that.
Mhm.
We're now living on a flat level, so you eliminate some of that.
Yeah.
Just keep it. That's why I was, and we knew he was getting. He said, I think he said, I got 560 very much, I just really up.
Yeah.
So he said, I'll see you in here, let's see.
Yeah.
That's been kind of on our minds.
I mean, I think that's good, but also at the same time, there's, you know, and like we're obviously a Pat Casey family for ACLs and stuff like that, but there are other good doctors too. And don't get something done before you need to get it done because
So that's
somebody's
what
gonna
he's saying.
retire.
How can he say?
Yeah, because you may be good, you know, whatever they put in is never gonna be as good as the original equipment. So,
So that's been a big relief
Yeah.
for us, because that's been kind of outstanding.
Yeah.
For something. So I didn't get a chance to sleep in this morning.
no, well, either did I, so I got up at
Oh, you know,
5 a.m.
Thank God.
No,
That happens.
no. Happens a lot with these marathon meetings.
I know, right, so this is a building aid idea, and I'm sharing it with you, because I sent you a text, but I don't know if you get it, because I don't know as if I actually have your cell phone number, and that's why,
Who
that's
knows
why I
where it
mentioned.
went?
read it, read it, and-
Yeah, right, and that's why, I actually just wanted, it was this morning, I was like, oh. I'll
Oh,
be
you
there
sent
at
it this
9.
morning?
Yeah, I was like, I'll be there at 9, and I only asked because I don't know if I actually have your, correct number. But don't really worry about it, if not, I'll get.
No, I'm just looking at this morning, so.
It was to you and Representative Black. So the point is that I went over this with him this morning, so he is aware of my, just brainstorming again. So the way we see it works for building aid is we, a proration amount, of everybody that applies. So I was just curious if that model, I'm still talking about. my
You're